You feel unqualified, not a little uncertain, completely, overwhelmingly, almost humiliatingly unqualified for what you sense God is calling you toward. And you've been treating that feeling like a red light, like a warning sign, like evidence that you should step back, wait until you're more ready, more prepared, more put together before you move. But what if I told you that the feeling of being completely unqualified is not a red light? What if it is the exact confirmation that you are exactly where God needs you to be before He does something extraordinary through you? Stay with me, because this changes everything. There is something God has placed on your heart, a calling, a vision, a step of faith that keeps surfacing no matter how many times you try to suppress it. And every time it rises, you immediately begin the inventory. I don't have the right education. I don't have the right connections. I don't have the right resources. I haven't healed enough from the past. I'm not experienced enough, polished enough, established enough. The list of reasons why you are not the right person for this is long, and you've rehearsed it so many times it has started to feel like wisdom. But the truth is, it has become a wall. And behind that wall, a calling is waiting that the world needs and that God has specifically designed you to carry. And every day you stay behind the wall of your own inadequacy, the assignment waits. The people it was supposed to reach wait. The glory it was supposed to produce for God waits. And the devastating irony is this: you are not waiting until you are qualified. You are waiting for a feeling that God never promised you would feel before you obeyed. Because the God of Scripture has a very consistent track record, and that track record shows something that should both terrify and liberate you at the same time. Go to Exodus chapter 3. One of the most pivotal moments in all of human history is unfolding. God appears to Moses in a burning bush. He has heard the cries of an enslaved people, and he is about to commission the man who will lead the greatest liberation movement the ancient world had ever seen. He looks at Moses and gives him the assignment, "Go to Pharaoh, bring my people out of Egypt." And Moses, the man God chose for this, opens his mouth in Exodus 3 verse 11 and says, "Who am I, that I should go unto Pharaoh, and that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt?"
Who am I? 2 words, the most ancient expression of disqualification in history. Moses is not being modest. He is being specific. He is a man with a complicated past, a fugitive, a shepherd, a man who left Egypt in failure and spent 40 years in relative obscurity. He looks at the assignment and he looks at himself, and the gap between the two feels unbridgeable. And God's answer in verse 12 is the answer you need to hear today. Certainly I will be with you. God did not say, "You're more qualified than you think." He did not say, "Let me remind you of your strengths." He said, "I will be with you." The answer to Moses' inadequacy was not Moses, it was God, and that changes the entire equation. Here is the profound truth that most believers miss about the feeling of being unqualified. God does not primarily look for qualified people. He looks for available people, people who are empty enough of their own confidence to be filled with His. Because if you walk into the assignment feeling fully qualified, you will walk into it trusting yourself. And a person who trusts themselves in a God-given assignment will take the credit when it succeeds. But when God chooses someone who looks at the calling and says, "Who am I?" and then obeys anyway, the only explanation for what happens next is God. And that is exactly the testimony He is trying to build through your life. Paul says it so clearly in 1 Corinthians 1 verse 27. "But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. And base things of the world, and things which are despised, hath God chosen, that no flesh should glory in His presence." That no flesh should glory. That is the purpose. God deliberately selects the people that human logic would never select, so that when the assignment is completed, when the miracle happens, when the impossible becomes reality, no one can point to the person and say they did it. Everyone has to look up and say, that was God. And you, with all your inadequacy, all your unpolished edges, all your I don't have what it takes, you are the exact kind of vessel that makes God's glory undeniable.
And Zechariah 4, verse 6 states the operating principle of God's entire strategy in one line. Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. The assignment was never designed to be accomplished by your strength. It was always designed to be carried by His Spirit. Your inadequacy is not a barrier to the Spirit. It is an invitation for the Spirit, because the Spirit moves most powerfully through vessels that have stopped trusting in themselves. Let these words break something open in you. God does not call the qualified. He qualifies the called, and the qualification arrives when you step out, not before. Your feeling of inadequacy is not evidence that you misheard God. It is evidence that what He is asking you to do is big enough to require Him. And hear this clearly. Moses said, "Who am I?" And God said, "I will be with you." That is the only qualification you were ever going to need. Now, I want to take you to the Apostle Paul, a man of extraordinary intellect, extensive training, and genuine spiritual authority. And yet, in 2 Corinthians 12, Paul describes something that should give every inadequate, unqualified, not enough believer enormous hope. Paul had a thorn in his flesh, something he couldn't fix, something that made him feel limited, something he prayed about 3 times, asking God to remove it, and God said no. Not because He didn't hear, not because He didn't care, but because in verse 9, God gave Paul one of the most revolutionary statements in all of Scripture. My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Made perfect in weakness, not in strength, not in preparation, not in the moment when you finally feel ready, in weakness. The inadequacy you feel is not where God's strength is absent. It is where God's strength is most fully expressed. The very thing that makes you feel disqualified is the condition that creates the greatest capacity for God's power to operate through you.
And Paul understood it so completely that he says in verse 10, "For when I am weak, then am I strong." Not when I overcome my weakness, not when I no longer feel inadequate, but when I am weak. Right there, in the middle of it, that is where the strength is. And this is the man with the thorn, the man who knew what inadequacy felt like from the inside, who later wrote the words that have sustained believers across thousands of years of impossible assignments. Philippians 4, verse 13. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. He did not say, I can do all things because I am strong enough. He said, through Christ, which strengtheneth me. The strength is not inside him by nature. It is supplied by Christ in the moment of need. And the same supply that carried Paul through beatings and shipwrecks and imprisonments is available to you in the assignment you feel completely unqualified for. Moses said, who am I? And led a nation out of slavery. Gideon said, I am the least, and defeated an army with 300 men. Jeremiah said, I cannot speak, and became one of the most powerful prophetic voices in all of history. And Paul, with a thorn in his flesh and a record of persecuting Christians, became the man whose letters shaped the theology of the entire Christian church. Not one of them was qualified before they were used. Every single one of them felt exactly what you are feeling right now. And God used every single one of them anyway, because when they stepped out of their own adequacy, He stepped in with His. So today, I want to challenge you to do the most faith-filled, most terrifying, most necessary thing you may have ever done. I want you to take the unqualified feeling, the who am I that has been stopping you, and instead of letting it be a reason to wait, let it be a reason to pray. Say to God what Moses said,
Be honest about it. Who am I? And then listen for what God said to Moses. Certainly, I will be with thee. Because that answer has not expired. It is still being spoken to every person God has called. In every season they feel least equipped. In every moment, the assignment seems too large for the person. You were never supposed to be enough for this. The assignment was always going to be bigger than you. That was intentional, because God did not design it to showcase you. He designed it to showcase Himself through you. And an empty vessel, surrendered and obedient, is the most powerful instrument in the hands of the living God. Stop waiting until you feel qualified. Start moving and watch how God qualifies the step. Because the credential you need is not in your resume, it is in the God who said, I will be with thee. If this message met you in the middle of your who am I moment today, drop a comment below. Just say, I will be with thee. Claim that promise over your calling right now. And if this channel has been walking alongside your faith journey, subscribe and stay with us. Every single week, we return to the Word and find our way back to the courage to say yes. You are not too unqualified. You are just available enough. And that is all God ever needed.